Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tzadik Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom at the new Mishnah. Our Mishnah continues to discuss various items and their shiurim from Meleches Hautzah. The Mishnah begins as follows: Hamoitzi kupas haroichlin. Kupas haroichlin were roichlin, peddlers who would sell different types of spices and perfumes for women. So they had different small boxes of these perfumes that had bundles of spices in them. The Mishnah says, "Hamoitzi kupas haroichlin, afa pisha yeshba minin harbe, eino chayiv elachatos achas." Even though there are many types of spices contained in this one bundle, nonetheless they'll only be chayiv for one korban chatos. And the obvious question is, what's the chiddush? After all, why should a person be chayiv more than one chatos? After all, he's only doing one malacha of hoitzah. And asks Tosfos the same question. Dibra Masra Hamotzi Kupas Haroichlin. Says Tosfos, Tema, with a wonderment. Demai Kamash Malon. What is our Mishnah coming to teach us? Pshita. It's straightforward. Dafilu bohoitzi v'choze v'hoitzi. Eino chayv ela achas. Even a person were to go out of his Rishus HaYachid, making a nakira, and then going into the Rishus HaRab, making hanocha, and then, sometime later on, he takes another object and does the same thing, going from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim. He'll only be chayiv once if it's behelim echad, with one forgetful period. So certainly when it's going to be one akira and one hanocha. Kemo, v'kotze v'choze v'kotzar. Just like a person were to then do a kitzira, and then sometime after behelim echod do another kitzira, he's only going to be chayiv one korban chatos. Kol shekain b'bas achas. Certainly when he goes and he does it all together, like in this case. Va'afilu Rav Yosef debechayiv alibud Rav Eliezer bekotzer v'chozer v'kotzer beperek amruloi. Even though Rav Yosef does explain the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer that he would be chayiv for each kitzir that he does. However, says Tosfos, behoitzah achas pshita de potter. But when it's one hoitzah, certainly he's only going to be chayiv one korban chatos, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. V'tiras Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam answers the following explanation. What is the chiddush in our Mishnah? The Mari kigon shenoida loy al min ze minischaper, v'choze v'noida loy al min acher. He becomes aware that he was carrying jasmine. Then he brings a korban chatos, and then only afterwards he's noida loy, becomes aware that indeed inside of that bundle also had cinnamon. Afilu hochi potter dahavi hakol kemoy davar echad. You might have thought he's chayiv twice, since it's one matter, it's one bundle of spices, and therefore it's considered to be enough to bring only one korban chatas for all of those spices. Back in the Mishnah, Zeiroine Gino Pochos Mikigro Geres. The seeds that are used for planting in a garden, those are going to be chayiv for a sheer minimum that is less than a kigro geres, less than a dried fig. So here we're obviously not talking about those seeds that are either going to be needed to be used for eating, or they're going to be edible altogether, because if they were, then they would be chayiv a full kigro geres like all other shiurim for achila. So here we're not talking about that which is something that is going to be litzarech achila, or according to some others we'll explain that it's not even edible altogether. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Chamish. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira argues and he says a smaller shiur, 5 seeds, is enough to mechayiv a korban chatos. Well, on top of that, Tzadik Amud Beis, the Mishnah continues and says that there are certain seeds that have chashivus, and therefore a smaller shear, according to everybody, will mechayiv a korban chatos. Zera kishuin shnayim. 2 seeds of a zucchini are considered to be chashuv, and that's a minimum shear of 2. Zera diluin shnayim. The seeds of a gourd are also chashuv, and therefore 2 of them is sufficient to mechayiv a korban chatos. Zera pul hamitzri shnayim. Also a seed of a mitzri, an Egyptian bean. 2 of those seeds will also mechayiv a korban chatos. Says the Mishnah Vayter, Chagav Chai Tor Koshu. A kosher grasshopper, when it's alive, will be chayiv a koshu, a minimum amount, meaning even a small grasshopper, because a person can give to his child to play with this grasshopper, whereby it has significance. Meis kigrogeres. If it's dead, since it's a kosher grasshopper, it's edible, and like all other shiurim with achila, is going to be a dried fega kigrogeres. Tzipores kromim, another type of grasshopper that's kosher. Bein chaya bein meiso, kol shehu shematzino iso l'refuah. Since it's a grasshopper that is used for medicinal purposes, therefore whether it's alive or it's dead, the minimum shear would be a kol shehu, a small grasshopper. Rabbi Yehuda oimer, af hamoitzi chagav chai tomei koshu. Rabbi Yehuda argues on what the Tanna Kama said, when the Tanna Kama said a grasshopper will have a shear of a kosher, that's talking about a kosher grasshopper. But Rabbi Yehuda says even a non-kosher grasshopper will also be considered to be a minimum shear of a kosher when it's alive. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda says that you can still give it to a child to play with. The Gemara will explain the machloikes be'ezer Hashem between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda, why indeed the Tanna Kama argues and says when it comes to a non-kosher grasshopper, you cannot use the minimum shear of a kol shehu. Doesn't have the same significance. The Gemara now brings the following question from a Mishnah we saw on Daf Pei Amud Beis. Ureminhu, zevel v'chol hadak, meaning fertilizer or fine sand, kedei lezabel kelach shel kruv, in order to fertilize a stalk of a cabbage. Div Rabbi Akiva, v'chachamim oimrim kedei lezabel krisha. The chachamim say even a smaller shiur of fertilizing a leek. So we see over here even one seed is significant, and therefore why does our Mishnah say a greater shiur? Answers the Gemara, Omar Papa, Hod Zeriya, Hod Eloi Zeriya. The difference is that which it says in the previous Mishnah that Pei Amud Beis is talking about where it was already sown, and therefore it was already sown, that's going to be there the shear of the minimum of these seeds. But our Mishnah is talking about actually seeding, and therefore if it wasn't yet sown yet, then it's a smaller shear because a person is not going to then hassle himself to then plant something that's so small because it takes a lot of labor to do so. A person is not going to then matriach himself to take one seed and plant it. It's not worth his while, because then he has to then not only plant it, he has to water and tend to it. For one seed is not going to be worthwhile. Therefore, it's only going to be significant if it's a greater shear, and that's what our Mishnah is referring to. Weiter, the Mishnah says zera kishuin, that there are certain seeds that have chashivus and therefore a smaller shear. Now the Gemara brings a brayse, Tana Rabbana hamoitzi garinin. If a person takes out pits of a date pits, im lenitiyah shtaim, if they're for the purpose, they're designated as a purpose for planting, so then it requires two date pits in order to be chayiv. Im la'achila k'maloi pi chazir. If it's in order to then feed an animal, then it has the shear of a pi chazir. The Gemara interjects, v'kama mole pi chazir. What is the mole pi chazir? What is the mouthful of a chazir? The Gemara answers, achas, one of these date pits is sufficient. Therefore, that will be enough to mechayiv a korban chatos. Im lahasik, the brayse continues, kedei levasho beit kala. If this pit, the date pit, is used for fuel, to fuel a fire, then it's significant if it can go ahead and cook a beitza kala, which is a beitza of a hen, and doesn't mean the entire egg. It means kigrogeres of a beitza kala. Im lecheshboin, the brayse continues, if this date pit is in order to make a cheshbon, That means to say that a person wants to use the date pits in order to then correspond to a certain amount that he's counting. So here the Tana says shtayim, then the minimum shear is 2 date pits. Achim oimrim chamesh. Achim argue and say it's not going to be significant to be used as a way of helping one count unless it's 5, because people don't need to use a memory to facilitate their memory with a date pit if it's just going to be 2. Only when they get to a higher number, then 5 date pits will then correspond each one to a certain amount of numbers. Tanur Rabbanan, the Gemara now brings a brayso, hamoitzi shnei nimin mizonov hasus umizonov hapora chayev. If a person takes 2 hairs from the tail of a horse or tail of a cow, he's going to be chayev, because that has significance to make the Gemara says, it has a significance, shematzlino so the nishovin, has a significance to make a net to trap birds. Miksha shel chazir, if it's taking that type of hair that grows on the spine, the back of the pig, of the chazir, which is much more hard and coarse, then achas, 1. Because then it's going to be significant to be used almost like a needle. For those who want to then be toifer, those craftsmen that want to be toifer, they can use this as in place of a needle. Tsure dekel, the leaves of a dekel tree, shtayim, will have the significance of 2 because they can be used to weave a basket. Tore dekel, if it's the fibers in the dekel tree, achas, 1 is sufficient. Because after all, this can be used as a way of sewing a gourd and then being able to then drink from the gourd. The Gemara now says, the Mishnah, quoting the Mishnah, Tziparis kromim bein chaya bein mesa kolshu. Here everybody agrees this type of grasshopper, whether it's alive or it's dead, even the minimum amount would be a kolshu to mechayev a korban chatos. My tziparis kromim, what is this type of grasshopper? The Gemara answers, Omar Rav Pilyo Biyari. That's its name. Omar Abaye says, Umishtakach bediklo dechad navoro. He says it can be found in a vine in a dekel tree. Va'avdi lo lechukma, and they would use this in order to open up one's mind, one's heart, in order to have greater understanding. Ochile lepalga diyamine. It's prescribed to eat the right half of this grasshopper. Upalga dismolye ramila begufto denechosha. And the other half, the left half of the grasshopper, is to be thrown into a copper tube. V'chosim la beshisin gushpanki, and to be sealed with 60 seals. Lav dafka 60 seals, but many different seals to then cover it up and seal it. V'tali la be'evora dismola, and then it should be hung on the person's left arm. V'simonach, and the way to remember that this is the procedure is as follows. It's in the Posuk. Leiv chacham liyaminoi. The heart of the wise one is to the right. Therefore, it'll make him wise by eating the right side of the grasshopper. V'leiv kasil lismolo. And the heart of the fool is to the left, and therefore they'll hang the left side on the rest on the left arm of the person, since he's a ksil. V'chakim kamed de boy, and he'll become as wise as much as he would like. V'gomar kamed de boy, and he'll be able to learn as much as he would like. He'll be able to absorb a lot of material with this type of method of healing, of opening of his heart, of understanding. Then he needs to eat the second half that he didn't eat, that left part. Talmud, because if not, he will then uproot all of his learning and he'll forget it. The Gemara now quotes the Sefer Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda Oimer Af HaMoitzi, even one who takes out a non-kosher grasshopper when it's alive will also be chayev for a minimum shear of a kol shehu. The Tana Kama sovar lo, whereas the Tana Kama argues and said only if it's a grasshopper that is kosher. Ask the Gemara, my time, what's the reason why the Tanakama argues? After all, if you're going to give the grasshopper to the play for the son to play with, the child to play with, so then even if it's a non-kosher grasshopper, says the Gemara, because dilma ochile, maybe because the child will eat it, and if it's not kosher, then he'll be eating something that's not kosher, whereby the parent can't give the child such a grasshopper. If that's true, ask the Gemara, yihachi tohar nami. Even if it is kosher, also he can't give it. Granted, if it's going to be eaten, it won't be an issue of Ever Minachai, and it doesn't need Shchita, but nonetheless, there's still another problem, as the Gemara will explain now, about Tishaksu. The whole Rav Kahana have a koyim kamei de Rav. Rav Kahana was in front of Rav. V'hava kima'aber shushiva apume. And Rav had a kosher grasshopper next to his mouth. Omar lei, Rav said to Rav Kahana, shakle, take away the grasshopper. The loy limre mechel ka'achile. They shouldn't say that I'm eating this grasshopper. V'ka'ovar mishum bal tishaksu es nafsho seichem. And then be over the Easter bal tishaksu. Because after all, if I would be eating it alive, it would be an Easter bal tishaksu. So therefore, even if it's tahor, that should then be a problem if we're concerned about the child eating it. Ela dilmo mayis ve'ochele. Rather, perhaps it will die and then the child will eat it. So if it's a kosher grasshopper, so then there's no problem. But if it's a non-kosher grasshopper, so then the parent is concerned that he's going to then ultimately have a child that may eat a non-kosher grasshopper if it were to die. Rabbi Yehuda imais, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it would die, koton mispad sapile. Says Rabbi Yehuda, I'm not concerned that the child will eat it because he's going to then eulogize such a grasshopper. He's not going to use it to eat it as a snack. That completes the Perek Hadron Aloch Omar Rabbi Akiva.